I didn't bring my laser beam with me, but in the center you can see she's got it circled there. You see that? Do you see it? Under Persia. And you'll notice that that's not too far from Baghdad, and right next there to, it was Babylon at one time, and Persia and all of that. So that tells you where Esther was during the time of the events in this book. And as I said last week, she was one of the captives in Persia. Now, she was probably young and was not part of the deportation. She probably was born in Persia, and I don't have any doubt about that. And so when Ezra and Nehemiah and Zerubbabel began to return back to Jerusalem after the 70-year captivity, several of the people stayed there. This was their homeland. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from. If you live in a country long enough, it becomes your country. And especially the second generation or the young children that come. We have folks here from different parts of the world, and some of you brought in small children. And as far as they're concerned, this has always been their country. They've learned the language and the culture. And so no matter who they are, where they're from, they think this way. And they make their friends, they buy their homes, they go to school. And so for all practical purposes, she was a Persian, born there, raised there, but she was also Jewish by religion. And so there were many, many Jews in Persia. Many of them stayed when the return took place, as I said, under Nehemiah and Ezra and Zerubbabel. All right, let's have a word of prayer, and we'll make a few comments about this book this evening. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for this good day. Thank you for the blessings of what we have seen and heard. Thank you for those who made commitments and responses to you. I pray you'll help them to grow in their Christian life. We thank you for this book, the Bible. I pray you'll help us to understand it. In Christ's name, amen. All right. Now, this portion we're going to talk about today is here in chapter 1, and it is about Ahasuerus and Esther. And last week we learned that Esther is a book of God's providence. And how many of you need the notes? You didn't get them. Hold your hand up. We got guys standing waiting. Everybody got the notes? Okay. Well, they're free, so. All right. Some guys in the balcony up there. Do you folks, you don't have the notes, do you? You have them? Okay, good. All right. I just want to make sure you got them. All right. Now, as we said last week, we learned that Esther is a book of God's providence. And there are no miracles recorded in the book, and yet you see God working in the background and really orchestrating events. God's providence is still working. It always has, and it does today. And many times we call it happenstance. We call it luck, just the way things are. You can call it anything you want to, but God is always working in the background on your behalf. And these usually are not miracles. They're just events that God uses to bring about His will. So here in chapter 1, you have several truths about the marriage relationship in the life of Ahasuerus and his wife Vashti. And the book of Esther begins with a banquet here in chapter 1, and it ends with a banquet in chapter 9, and then there is another banquet. So I guess they do a lot of banqueting. No wonder they got divorced. But you have one in the middle in chapter 7. And so this is the way it begins, the way the book opens here in chapter 1. It opens with this king throwing a lengthy banquet for the purpose of, I think he's getting ready to go to war, perhaps with Greece, but also showing off and displaying his great wealth and his military. So the banquet here in this chapter sets the stage for the events of the book. If you didn't have this banquet, you wouldn't know how Esther even became part of the plan here. And so as I said, it is believed that Ahasuerus was seeking to win support from his many provinces on an upcoming military campaign with Greece. Now let me say some things about this book in verse 3 and 4. This banquet, if you'll notice, was quite an affair. In the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast unto all his princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes and the provinces before him, being before him. Verse 4, when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 160 days. Boy, that's quite a party, isn't it? And so when those Persians do things, they do it in a big way. Actually, there's 127 provinces in all. And this thing lasted 6 months. It's a 6-month party. And what he's trying to do is impress and display the glory and the wealth of his kingdom, which is what he did. And of course it was completely pagan, so you can imagine what was going on. In verses 5 through 8, in the final days of this, he includes a number. Let's see. In the final 7 days, he included a great number of his generals, okay? And he brought those in, if you want to look at verse 5, and he lists those. And those, when these days were expired, so at the end of the party, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan, the palace, both great and small, 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. So now he's probably bringing in people that are more important to his kingdom. And the displays in verse 6. And in the garden there were white and green and blue hangings. These are all symbolic of wealth. And they were fastened with cords of fine linen, purple and silver rings, and pillars of marble. The beds were of gold and silver upon a pavement of red and blue and white and black marble. So this was quite a kind of a lavish setting here for the king. So you notice the number 7 in the passage. You have 7 days. You find that you have, in chapter 1, verse 10, you have 7 chamberlains. And then in 1:14, you have 7 princes. And probably typifies something in heaven in the throne room, because you read Revelation chapter 4, verse 5, you'll see this number 7 coming up repeatedly. You'll notice in verse 8 that the drinking was not compelled upon anyone. You didn't have to drink unless you wanted to. Verse 8, and the drinking was according to the law, and the law was simply this: none did compel, for so the king had appointed to all the officers of his house that they should do according to every man's pleasure. So they could get as drunk as they wanted to. There's no limit. They could do whatever they wanted to. So that was the law the king had set. And so it was really a time of no doubt debauchery and everything else, because these are heathen people who have no concept of the Lord. And I know some of you work in places to where they have a Christmas party, and you're expected to drink. You go to a promotion of someone in the company, and you many times are expected to drink, and you feel conspicuous and awkward if you don't. And if you don't, many times you're not promoted, and all of that kind of stuff. I like what I heard that General MacArthur said many years ago. He was at a large meeting, and the servants came in, turning the champagne glasses over so that everybody could fill up the glass. And when the girl came to him to pour the champagne, he turned the glass upside down. And she says, "Oh, don't you want anything to drink?" He said, "No, ma'am. My mama said she'd whip me if I ever drank." And he stood by it. And of course, I'm sure he wasn't a bit intimidated, but thank God for him. And you just have to be careful where you go and who you're with because of what their expectations are. And so it's really important that you understand those things before you get there, and that you protect yourself. And in verse 9, Vishti was holding a separate. Now his wife was having a separate banquet for the women. And you'll notice in verse 9, also Vishti the queen made a fast or a feast for the women in the royal house, which belonged to the king. So here she is, the queen, and all of these people have come from all over the known world, and they've come to honor the king. He puts everything on display to show his mighty wealth, to impress them. And he probably was drunk by the time you get to verse 10, probably looped, because someone comes to him, and there in verse 10 it says, "And on the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine," he had his chamberlains to come, and the answer is down there about verse 11. But the question arises not concerning the king, but any king or ruler. And I want you to look at what Proverbs. I want you to keep your place there and go to the right, if you will, and look at Proverbs 31. This is a kind of a common question that people ask about drinking. And but in Proverbs 31, look at verse 4. I'll wait for you to find it. I want you to see it. And you ought to underline it. Lemuel evidently was a king, or to be a king, and his mother said to him, verse 4, "It is not for kings, O Lemuel, it is not for kings to drink wine, nor for princes strong drink." God says through the writer of the book of Proverbs that it is not fitting, it is not wise, it is not proper for leaders to drink, because drinking distorts your judgment. And you and I know that many politicians and people in leadership, they are alcoholics, and can you imagine these people? We talk about pilots flying the airplane while they're drinking. What about somebody that's running a country or the government, and they're trying to make judgment while they're drunk or under the influence of alcohol? And so God warns people in leadership, if you have judgment and have to make decisions, that you ought to avoid that. And I'm confident that this king was drunk. I don't know why I would think any otherwise, because there is a verse that says that the drinking was according to the law, and none did compel, and everybody was able to do what they wanted to. And so they could do according to their pleasure. So the tap was open 24/7, evidently. Now, in verse 11, he displayed his wealth, and he'd already done that, He'd already done that. He displayed his wealth and all of his luxury. And now, under the influence of alcohol, he does something that is contrary to the proprieties of that day. And what he did is he wanted to display the beauty of his wife. And, you can just imagine anything you want to, because he's wanting to bring her in from the women's quarters and from the feast that she was throwing for the other women, and bring her in and display her to the men. And so he decides that he will bring her there and before the men. Now, I don't think he'd ever done this if he hadn't been drunk. And I just want to warn our young people, you already know this, but I'll tell you again, you want to be very, very careful about what you drink and where you drink and all of these kind of things. You will do things under the influence of alcohol that you'd never think about doing. You'll do it. Old Billy Sunday said, when the wine goes in, the wit goes out. Billy Sunday said, a man who votes for alcohol is pulling on the same rope with the devil. And Jim Seaman told me, after he told me, and he was a fellow that spent many, many years in police work, he said, were it not for alcohol, he said, we would have practically no domestic problems. And he's been called to them for 20-something years, so he knows. And almost in every domestic problem, either alcohol or drugs is involved. If you eliminated those two things, you could eliminate probably 75% of the crime. Maybe more. I don't know. So, just stay away from that. You don't need it. If your heart is hurting that bad, go find a counselor and get alone with the Lord. But don't get into a bottle, You'll curse the day. You'll curse the day you do. You know how to not to become an alcoholic is don't take the first drink. Now, here's what I've read. The thing about becoming an alcoholic, you never know when you're becoming. You discover it when you are. And then you're in denial. But the thing about becoming an alcoholic, it's like putting a blindfold on. And you don't know if a thimble full or a glass full or a barrel full is what it'll take for you. And with some people, it just takes one drink, and they're gone. So you need to stay away from that stuff, okay? I told somebody the other day, I would buy cooking wine for my wife, but as sure as I would, I'd have church members at Costco saying, "Oh, what do you got there, Pastor?" I said, "It's for my wife." She tells me she's cooking. She's an awfully happy cooker. No, I'm kidding. I wouldn't buy it. I wouldn't buy it. If I did, I'd go across the border to another state and not come back until it was gone. My luck, I'd get picked up. Wouldn't that be something? I have no interest in it. I have no interest in it. And I don't want you to have interest in it. Stay away from it. And you don't have to go to parties. And you shouldn't go to them where they're drinking. Stay away from them. You don't have to do those things. You take most of these young people who get killed in car wrecks, alcohol's involved. It's always, you don't have to be smart to figure that out. So you're not smarter than God. God warns about it from the beginning to the end. And I put up for years with a grandfather who was an alcoholic. He was a drunk, and he threatened to kill me when I was a little boy. He was mad at my grandmother. This is over in Wenatchee in the apple orchards, and we lived there on that lower Sunny Slope Road. And my mother and I, before she'd married my stepdad, and he was mad at his wife, my grandmother. I think he was jealous of her. And he was drinking. And I remember as a boy sitting on the bed, it's a little one-room cabin like they have over in those orchards over there. And I was sitting on that bed with my mother and my grandmother, and I'm sitting there as a little boy, and my granddad sitting across in front of us with a pistol. And he had threatened he was going to kill us. And I was crying. I don't remember. He didn't kill us, I can tell you that. But thank God for that. I remember in Arkansas, another scene that involved a gun. And he was drunk going down through this little town that we lived in, firing this pistol in the air. And I saw his oldest boy, John Byler, go out and grab him and wrestle the gun away from him and throw it out into a cornfield. That's alcohol. He didn't like my stepdad. And we lived quite a ways out and around the Narrows, they called it, in a river there. And I remember one night he was looking for my stepdad. He was going to kill him. When he got to drinking, when he didn't drink, he was one of the best men on the earth, on the planet. He got to drinking, he got mean. And my mother said, she said, I never saw him that way till the 2 twin boys got killed in the Army. And those were his baby boys, Floyd and Lloyd. They were 21 years old, and they got killed 30 days apart. And from that time down, it was a spiral downward for my granddad. And he was mean. And when he started drinking, he got mean. I never was mean to me, personally, other than going to kill us. But how mean is that? But I'm just telling you, I've seen enough of that stuff. Seen enough of it. I know a guy right now, if I mention his name, some of you would know him. He's dying of cirrhosis of the liver. He's not very old, but he's been a drinker all of his life. One of my good buddies, Billy Jeffrey, he went through 3 marriages because of alcohol, and he could not quit. And he took a 357 and blew his brains out and killed himself. So, I have nothing good to say about alcohol. Nothing good whatsoever. So the best thing to do is stay away from it and avoid it. All right? Now, I don't know if I covered this or not. This is another point here. Ahasuerus, he might have said to his guest, I have a real surprise for you, and I want you to see my queen. And she's going to stand before you with the crown royal upon her head. She's a real knockout, And, once again, when people start drinking, they get their kids. Kids are molested because somebody's drinking or on drugs. And young girls, guys get them drunk, get them drinking. Next thing you know, they've got them pregnant. So just realize that the devil is the one that's trying to get you to lose your self-control. The devil is the one that is trying to get you to lose your wits about you and not be able to make good judgment. And this is what's going on here. In verse 12, they bring, the chamberlain comes back. If you look at verse 12, it said, and the queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlain. Wherefore the king was very wroth, and his anger burned in him. I'm sure it did, because he was embarrassed. But he brought it upon himself. He requested something he could not have requested. And so now he has to stand before the crowd and say, well, I'm sorry, gentlemen, but we're going to have to change the program. My wife is not coming over here. And then they probably begin to make fun of him. Say, well, you're a king? Are you really a king? Well, you can't even run your own house. And so the buzzing starts throughout the banquet, and the guests begin to say, what kind of king are you? You can't even command the queen to come to you. And so now he's put in a position to actually going to lose his wife. But he put himself there by his foolish demand. And so Vashti actually may picture those Gentiles who refuse to answer the call of the gospel and are set aside to restore Israel in God's plan, according to the book of Romans. Now, she may not be, but she may be a picture, because the Lord had a great supper, and he invited many to come. And then verse 13 through 18, you see her example of refusing to come, how it would influence all that live in the kingdom. And you see this in verses 15 through 18. And they began to say, well, if your wife doesn't respond to you and the word gets out, we're going to have to start cooking our own supper. Look at verse 17. For this deed of the queen shall come abroad unto all women, so that they shall despise their husbands in their eyes. And when it is shall be reported that King Ahasuerus commanded Vashti the queen to be brought before him, but she came not. So they're saying now we're going to have to make a law that women will obey. And so they begin to cook up a plan there, verses 13 through 18, so that wives would not be tempted to rebel against their husbands. Now, he really was accusing the king of being wimpy. And he's worried about, no doubt this chamberlain is worried about his own wife when he gets home, verse 18. Because if the queen is going to get away with disobeying the highest authority in the land, then surely his wife, my wife, will say to me, I don't have to obey. In verse 19 and 20, if you'll notice, it says, if it please the king, let there be a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the law of the Persians and the Medes. You've heard people say that's the law of the Medes and the Persians. In other words, it's kind of a fixed law. They couldn't change it. So, and what the king said had to be, even if he was sorry for it, it had to be carried out. And so, that it be not altered. And Vashti, verse, I'm in the middle of verse 19, that Vashti come no more before the king Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal estate to another that's better than her. In verse 20, and when the king's decree which he had made shall be published throughout all his empire, for it is great, all the wives shall give their husbands honor, both to the great and the small. I think men have this idea, some men, that if they're an authority and if they have strong control, that their wives will respect them more. But you don't get respect that way. You don't get respect by making laws. You get respect by earning respect. I mean, that's how you get respect. You can demand it if you want to, and if people, as long as they have to follow you, but that doesn't mean they respect you. So you get people to respect you by doing right and by loving them and caring about them. And so they're going to make a law regardless, and then they don't have to earn the respect of their wife. And they don't have to be good husbands in this case. So verse 19 and 22, that's in verse 20, all the wives shall give their husbands honor. Look at verse 19. Let me see. Verse. That's not what I want. Okay, verse 20. And it says, and all both wives shall give their husbands honor, both small and great. All right? Well, let's just look at some things here and see what we can find out. Keep your place here. And let's go to the book of Genesis, okay? And let's look at a few verses on this matter of husbands and wives, shall we? Let's go to Genesis chapter 3 and down about verse 16. Unto the woman, he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow shalt thou bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. Paul talks about that in Timothy, but we'll get there in just a moment. Look at chapter 18 of the book of Genesis. Look at chapter 18, verse 19. 18:19. For I know him, that's Abraham, that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord to do justice and judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he has spoken to him. Certainly Abraham loved his wife and earned her respect, and he respected her and she respected him. Let's go to 1 Corinthians, way over in the New Testament, and look at 1 Corinthians, I think, chapter 11. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, and down about verse 3. 1 Corinthians 11:3. But I would have you to know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Christ is God. So God has a plan for a chain of authority within the marriage, but making a law won't make it happen. It can command it. Go to Ephesians 5, and I'll show you how this thing works. Go to Ephesians chapter 5. Look at verse 22. Ephesians 5:22. Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husband as unto the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, as the church is subject to Christ, so let the wives be to their husbands in everything. But watch verse 25. Husbands, love your wife, even as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. So a man's duty is to love his wife as much as Jesus Christ loved the church and died for it. And I think if you're willing to die for your wife and love her, you won't have too much trouble having her to respect you. And, that'll do more than laws and demands. I think verse 33. Look at verse 33 talking about the wives. And be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God, for Christ's sake, hath forgiven you. And so, there are many, many other verses. There's 1 Timothy 3 and also Titus 2 and 1 Peter 3, but we'll not go there tonight. And so when you think about ruling, you have to have responsibility. Responsibility always comes with ruling. And someone has said they ought to erect a statue next to the Statue of Liberty and call it the Statue of Responsibility. Because many folks don't understand that with privilege and with authority is responsibility. And that's one of the reasons you shouldn't drink, is so you can be responsible. And so a person who has liberty to do a thing, that he must also have responsibility for what he does. And if a man is going to run his home, then he has to take the responsibility for what goes on in that home. That's why many men become passive. A lot of women are frustrated because their husbands are passive. They will not take responsibility. If you don't take responsibility, then you can't fail. If you let your wife take responsibility, then you can blame her for everything that doesn't go right well. So a lot of men just become passive, and that way, all she can accuse him of is being passive. So does that make sense? And so when you take the leadership of the home or any area, you have to take the responsibility. And that is one of the reasons I see many times people are not willing to take the leadership, because they don't want the responsibility that goes with it. I've seen ministries right here at Open Door Baptist Church. I've said, who's in charge of it? Everybody just looks at each other. They want to run a ministry without anybody being in charge. Because if you're in charge, you can be held responsible. You understand how that works? So they're not willing to take the responsibility. They want the authority that goes with the job or the position or whatever, but they don't want the responsibility. And I've seen that kind of thing. And all that does is breed confusion and all kinds of problems and frustration. And that's why many women are angry and frustrated. And you get a lot of times, you get a husband and a wife and you meet with them. The husband sits back and says nothing. The wife does all the talking. You see? Well, that's the way he runs his life. And he lets her do that. Then he's not responsible. You made the decision. See? So that's kind of the way that thing works. Now, there are some moral lessons that you and I need to learn here. They're very basic. The first one is just don't drink. Don't drink. And let me, I don't know, I don't have it in my notes here, but let me see if I can find that proverb. Maybe some of you can help me. Where, here it is, I think. No, that's not it. I thought it was chapter 20, where he talks about the fellow drinking, and he says, yet will I seek it again. Help me out, Dave Schuler. We'll find it. I want you to see it. When you find it, tell me. It's in Proverbs. Anybody got a reference Bible out there? 2335, okay. 2335. That is not, yes, it is. Let's go to 2329. You want to know a little bit about drinking? Who hath woe? It's a good way to start it. Remember about the woes in the book of Revelation? Who hath woe? Who hath sorrow? Who hath contentions? Who hath babblings? Who hath wounds without cause? Who hath redness of eyes? You not only got a hangover, you've been beat up. And you just wrecked your car. And you got a ticket for $1,000 for drinking. And you lost your license. And you're going to spend 30 days in jail. Who hath woe? Who hath sorrow? Who hath contentions without cause? Who hath redness of eyes? All right, let's look at the rest of it. They, the answer's in verse 30, they that tarry long at the wine, they that go to seek mixed wine, mixed drinks. Okay? And here's the warning. Look not thou upon the wine when it is red, when it gives its color in the cup, when it moveth aright. It's fermenting here. It says once this stuff gets fermented, he says you stay away from it. Don't touch it. Don't touch it. And look at what it says in verse 32. At the last it biteth like a serpent, and stingeth like an adder. At the last. You know what? That's a poison snake. And at the end, it'll kill you. It'll kill your relationships. It'll kill everything about you. You'll start losing your friends because you can't get along with them. Who hath contentions? Then you'll start losing your family. The wife can't live with you. And then you're going to lose your job probably first before that. So it's a downhill. If you don't believe it, just go downtown Seattle and look at First Avenue or under the bridges. Just go look at them. They're not stupid people. They're doctors and lawyers and all walks of life. But they weren't smarter than the booze, because in the end, it kills you. It bites like a poisoned serpent when it's through with you. Look at verse 33. Your eyes shall behold strange women. These are foreigners. This is talking about Jews here. And he says you'll start hanging out with pagan women. That's what this is talking about here. I mean, what a good place to meet a wife at a bar. You know, what a good place to pick her up, you know. And then she kind of goes sour on you, and you say, what happened to you, you know? So, well, you found what you were looking for. Here I am, baby. All right? Thine eyes shall behold strange women, and thine heart shall utter perverse things. And by the way, you can't take back what you say. When you say things to your family, your husband or wife, or your friends when you're drunk, they don't forget it. They don't excuse it. You say, well, I didn't mean it, sweetheart. Well, you said it anyway. And then, yea, verse 34, thou shalt be as he that lieth down in the midst of the sea, or as he that lieth upon the top of the mast. You ever been seasick? I haven't, praise God. But I have been with guys that were as sick as death. I mean, I've been out fishing out here in the ocean with guys, and before they get a line in the water, they are vomiting out their guts, regurgitating for some of you. And but I'm telling you, you talk about sick. You can tell it when they're getting sick. Their eyes start getting glassy, and they stand and they keep looking at the horizon. And pretty soon they're in the bathroom, upchucking. And they, by the way, They don't get over it. They lay down. I fish with guys. They would lay down on the deck. You'd have to step over them. They'll be in the galley at the table. You ever been around guys like that, Brother David? This guy's a seaman, been there all of his life. He's been around all. Have you ever been there? Have you? Okay, well, you can tell from experience. Stillman, did you ever get sick? Yes. It's a horrible sickness, isn't it? Huh? No, you can't take anything for it. You know? One guy said, what was it? He said, he told the captain, if you'll take me back to shore, I'll buy this boat. He wanted to get back. Verse 35, they have stricken me, shalt thou say, and I was not sick. They have beaten me, and I felt it not. The guy's just numb from alcohol. You know, he got his teeth knocked out, and his eye black, and his lips swollen and cut. But notice what the dumb guy will say when he wakes up. I will seek it yet again. You just can't be too smart if that's the problem. So the thing then, the moral story here is to stay away from booze. You'll be all right if you do. And then I want you to read a verse that we did not read. I don't think we read it. It's back in Ephesians. I want you to see it. Go back to Ephesians 5 again. And verse 21. Verse 21. I didn't read that verse earlier, but I want to, because it says to the husband and the wife, it says, submit yourselves one to another in the fear of the Lord. So I think men have this idea that if I ever submit to my wife's will, then it's a sign of weakness. It's a sign of smartness. Husbands need to submit to their wives and to be sensitive to the wife's needs. And then last of all, wives need to obey their husbands even when they're wrong, and then don't say, I told you so. I told you so. My wife and I have tried to talk things out when decisions are made, just about no matter what it is. Now, honestly, I can't, as far as the ministry is concerned, I don't know of a time ever when my wife has questioned my decisions or judgment. I don't know that that's good. I don't know. But I can say I don't know of a time. I think that if somebody thinks that if a wife thinks a husband's not making a wise decision, I think it's only right that she at least say something. And then, if the husband is bent on doing it, then just keep your mouth shut and go along with the program. Let the boat sink and both of you go down together. You know, that's all I know. But it's better to do that than it is always be bickering and fighting for control. Always fighting for control. You know, I think if you've got a good marriage, you don't have to control your wife. I don't believe that. And, nobody likes to be controlled anyway. Church members don't want to be controlled. You don't want to, you're free. You've got the Holy Spirit. But we need to work as a team. And the same thing is true in marriage and a home. I mean, it's a team effort. And you have to give and take. And you have to probably... you just kind of have to give and take, or take more than you give. I guess that's what I wanted to say. But, and a wise woman builds her house, the book of Proverbs says. A wise woman builds her house. A foolish one plucks it down with her hands. One board at a time. Just bicker, complain, and bicker, and pretty soon you won't have anything left. She plucks it down with her hands. And so it's a big responsibility where there is Where there's privilege, there is great responsibility. And I really don't know of any greater responsibility than being a husband or wife. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it would be. Because if you lose your family, it's quite a loss. And people are losing them today because young people, they have not been instructed. They haven't seen good examples. And they're many times selfish. And just a lot of factors come in. So this king, though he had a great kingdom, through foolishness, he destroyed his reputation, destroyed his marriage. Now, all of this begins to set the stage for Esther. We haven't mentioned her yet. She's not in the first chapter. God is not mentioned in this first chapter. Prayer is not mentioned here. The Lord, nothing is mentioned about that. The writer is just telling you he's setting the stage for what he wants you to know in the next few chapters. Okay? So it's important. Now, Lord willing, next Sunday we will continue that, all right? Okay, Mark, anything? All right. Okay, let's stand together and we'll be dismissed.